Now, when should life in prison truly mean life? In New Mexico, the law says it should be incredibly rare. Only those who used to get the death penalty are supposed to be locked up forever. The rest of those sentenced for capital crimes like murder are supposed to spend 30 years behind bars, then get a fair parole hearing every 2 years after that. But New Mexico releases parole-eligible lifers at a far lower rate than other states, largely because the chairwoman of the state parole board believes that life means life in nearly all cases. And with the blessing of Governor Susana Martinez, she has nearly complete control over the decision of who goes free and who doesn't. This week, we'll look at a problem that threatens to further strain New Mexico's already overburdened criminal justice system. There's a growing number of inmates coming eligible for parole after 30 years in our state. Now, they're getting older in prison, and that means they're less likely to commit new crimes, and keeping them locked up is increasingly expensive. Correspondent Jeff Proctor walked through the morass of legal, public safety, and moral arguments surrounding the so-called 30-year lifers with two state lawmakers at the center of the debate.
Senator Bill O'Neill, Representative Bill Rehm, thank you both for joining us today. Let's get right to it. Senator O'Neill, you sponsored a bill at the legislature this past session that would have changed how the parole board decides which of the 30-year lifers is released from prison. The bill, of course, died in committee, but I'm interested in what it was you were trying to fix. What is the history of this issue in New Mexico?
Well, thank you, Jeff. The first thing I want to make clear is that this bill 216 in no way affected the parole board's process, business as usual, the parole board's duty to reject the parole of individuals who are not ready for release into our community, for those people that present a threat to society. So first of all, in no way did 216 threaten any of that. It simply said, if you're going to reject parole for these lifers, state why. 2-3 sentences, why? Now, the reason why this bill came about is that over the past 5 years, there have been 87 parole hearings for these individuals. 2 people have been released. So there's a problem systemically, and this is a process bill. So the whole point of this is that the parole board is a part of the criminal justice system, as Representative Rehm knows so well with his experience in law enforcement. You have the courts, law enforcement, parole. So this bill is a response to a logjam in this regard.
I want to talk about the list a little bit, the list of folks who are in prison, the so-called 30-year lifers. It's over 400 in the state now. Some of those folks are multiple murderers, rapist murderers, people who have killed police officers. Representative Rehm, you're a former Bernalillo County Sheriff's Captain. You voted against Senator O'Neill's bill in committee. I'm interested in the public safety argument that you were making, and also sort of what your history in working with Senator O'Neill has been.
Okay. And Jeff, thank you. And before we begin, while we may be from different parties, I'd like to give you a little history. We've worked together at the legislature for the last 9 years. Originally, Senator O'Neill was in the House, and so we became friends there. And to give an example of how closely we've worked together, this year, the two of us worked on and we passed the data breach notification law. So, you know, we have a personal relationship, and it's on this bill that we differ. You know, we have opposing views. One of the things that I think that Senator O'Neill changed in this bill is, rather than saying the parole board may parole it said it shall parole. So it kind of shifted to the burden of the proof now that the board must really show why you can't parole someone. Several areas of concern were removed from what the current parole procedure is, you know, looking at their past history, those kinds of things. And I think that from the parole board, their number one function is we need to go ahead and say to society that this person we do not believe will reoffend, and that it's safe to go ahead and release them. And so let's think back, if you went in prison 30 years ago, and again, these are murderers, and if you went in prison 30 years ago, think of what the cell phone was or the internet was at that point. So most of them have been detached from what society is, and they need to have a very good plan and a very stable place to go to once they're released. And I think a lot of those elements were removed. There's another one that I have concerns, and it was one that was expressed by the Attorney General's office, is that this may violate the Constitution because of the victim's right, and their right to a hearing, and their right to come and make statements before the parole board.
I want to let you respond to that a little
Yes.
bit, Senator O'Neill. Of course, I mentioned some of the folks on the list and some of the heinous crimes they committed before they were sentenced. There are also people who'd never committed a crime a single time before the day they killed somebody and have spent the last 3 decades in prison bettering themselves. I want to let you talk some about who should be released, who shouldn't be released, and what is it about the process that you feel like isn't fair?
Okay, well, thanks, Jeff. First of all, I want to talk about my firsthand experience in this area. I was the executive director of the Juvenile Parole Board for 3 years. It was my job to get the victims into this release hearing process. And I can tell you, it personally affected me on a deep level to sit with the victim's pain. And these were juvenile offenses, but the pain is pain, and the loss to their families was just overwhelming. So I want to emphasize the victim's voice is absolutely essential in any parole hearing, but it's a voice, not an automatic veto, which is the way, unfortunately, it seems to have been over the last 5 years, just with those numbers. The other thing is, back in the day when Dismas House first opened, and that's DISMAS, and it still exists in the North Valley, it's a residential program for former inmates, men and women, coming out of prison. So I would go in and interview prospective residents for Dismas House. It took me maybe 32 minutes to figure out that the older inmates were really good risks in terms of not reoffending. And so I have a lot of history with this older population. They turned out to be, on balance, excellent residents at Dismas House, success stories on many levels. So that's what I personally bring to this. So my issue is, look, we have to be smart on crime. We have to be, aware of the cost of locking people up indefinitely. Also, the notion of no chance for parole when you've been sentenced with the possibility of parole, that affects a person's behavior in the facility. It's a public safety issue within the facility, which Representative Ream knows very well with the correctional institutions and how that works. A person, and I've got these letters, since I introduced this bill, from individuals that have done decades in there, have been model prisoners, and they know that they have no chance for parole. And it's just, that is not the way the system's supposed to work. I have tremendous empathy for anyone who's on a parole board. I know what that's like. And my hat's off to everyone on that adult parole board. It's a difficult job, but they have a responsibility to discharge the parole process in a reasonable, intelligent way. So that's what this is about. And in no way is this undermining the pain of these horrific crimes and the victims and the loss they feel.
Representative Ream, as a retired law enforcement officer, and I've known you for a long time, I know the law is very important to you. So I want to ask, when a judge sentenced someone under the law, as it changed in 1980, the sentence was 30 years to life. And what's supposed to be happening is no matter what the crime was, these folks are supposed to be getting a fair hearing every 2 years when this comes up. My reporting for New Mexico in Depth and the Santa Fe Reporter pointed to some potential holes in whether or not this is a fair system as it's operating now. What's your sense of that, and what would you like to see the parole board considering when they're making these really, really important decisions about people's freedom?
Well, thanks, Jeff. And let me back up a little bit, because conceptually, Senator O'Neill and I agree on this process conceptually. Both of us since we have seen the victims and we have seen the offenders, know that there are certain individuals that are in there that, I hate to say this, when you talk to them, it's as if they have no soul. And you look at their violent past history, I think that absolutely must be considered. If you have an individual who is 20 years old and he went in there at 50, he still has time to be a criminal. But I think we agree once you reach 65, 70, if you will, your fighting years are over, and you'd be more passive, and you're not going to be a real threat to society. With that being said, I think you need to back up, though, but look at the previous crime. When you look at like the Hollywood video murder, that was extremely violent. Well planned out, cold-blooded killing. I think that if you look at the past history, and one of the examples I used to Senator O'Neill is, let's say that this individual who's in prison had poisoned the water system and killed several people. At 75, he still has the ability to do that. Whereas, if you will, his days of committing armed robbery is kind of over. It's hard to run from the crime if you're 75. So conceptually, we agree that towards the end, we don't want to have a geriatrics ward, but we got to make sure that we can tell the public that this person is not going to be a threat, or we don't think he's a threat, and we see that there is a successful plan in place to make that person succeed outside of prison. In the report on this bill that we have at the legislature, it noted one person who had been released, and that person right away violated parole and was sent back to prison. And that's not what we want to see. We want to see these individuals succeed once they leave.
I wanted to say that the one person who did violate parole, it was for an argument with his parole officer, and it's 1 out of 6 who've been released who actually return to prison. But I want to ask a couple of things.
I want to back up
Okay.
if I can.
Sure.
I can interrupt you. So he was released to live with his nephew in Texas. He attacked his nephew with a machete, was one incident. He had an issue at his AA meeting that he went to that involved the parole officer being involved. And then at the doctor's office, and in the physical impact report, which I'm referencing, the SWAT team had to be called to take him into custody. So I think it's a little more than he had an argument with his parole officer.
Do you think a more fair system would be able to separate and distinguish between the folks you're talking about? When you look at them, they have no soul, and then somebody who's 75 years old, who committed one crime their whole life, spent their time in prison, getting college degrees and helping others get their GEDs? Would a more fair process be able to distinguish between those two?
Jeff, I do agree. And the one person that we're talking about, the 75 years old, Senator O'Neill and I have spoken about it. I do think that is a very good candidate to go ahead and be paroled. And it's my understanding that he recently had a parole hearing, and a parole board is deliberating on whether he will be released or not. But I agree, here's an individual who made a very bad decision one time, has no criminal history prior to that, has been a model prisoner, doesn't have, write-ups in the prison where he's misbehaved and such. So I think that is exactly the person that the parole board should look at, possibly paroling.
If I may, there are many people like that are not being paroled. I mean, each situation is different. Each person is different.
Right.
I mean, some folks are just not good candidates for release. And I have confidence in the parole board And certainly when I was working with the Juvenile Parole Board, we took our job very seriously, and it's difficult work. But it's a good process if implemented in a fair, rational, systemic way. And that's the reason for this bill is that it's just not working that way. And that's why 216, that's how it came about. But I'm confident Representative Ream and I will continue to talk on this. I think the interim committees are coming up, and so for sure we're going to sit down and work with the language, because we all know it's not the intent of a bill, it's the specifics of a bill. And I acknowledge we need to work on some of the specifics of the language.
And I want to give you the last word on this. This is an issue that's not going away. The number of 30-year lifers has increased by 15% in New Mexico just in the last 3+ years. We're not the only state to struggle with this. Other states have found ways to implement some reforms here. What's next for this issue? What happens now?
Well, again, I'm really looking forward to working with Representative Ream on our interim Courts and Corrections Justice Committee. And we'll talk about this bill, and we'll just keep moving forward with it.
Jeff, I hate to say that I want to have the last word and go back to Bill, but one thing that happens when you introduce legislation like this is you start the discussion on this subject. And I foresee, that the parole board would, within itself, look at this legislation and say, well, we need to step back and look at what we are doing. Why is this legislation coming forward?
Yes.
We see this all the time once you introduce legislation. So, yeah. But
And is that something you expect and you hope will happen, that you can engage the board and get them to engage with you? I struggled to do that when I reached out to the board when I wrote my story.
Yeah. Jeff, I don't have communication with the board, but Senator O'Neill and I will tell you that when you have a subject matter that comes before the legislature, the parties involved all of a sudden start communicating. And I think that's going to happen with this.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that will happen.
Thanks very much to both of you for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.